Ethan Caldwell lived a quiet life on his ranch, a sprawling property nestled in the heart of a small, quiet town. The town, like the land surrounding it, had changed little over the years. It was a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and the pace of life was slow, steady, and predictable. But for Ethan, life had become something more like a routine after his wife's passing. It had been 5 long years since Lily, his beloved wife, had died. And despite the time that had passed, his heart had never fully healed. The world outside seemed bright and full of possibility, but to Ethan, it all seemed distant, as though the color had faded from life. The ranch was his home, and it was here that he found his peace working the land, caring for his horses, and living the way he always had, just him and his memories. Ethan wasn't looking for love again. In fact, he had convinced himself that it wasn't something he needed. After Lily's death, his world had shrunk. He didn't attend social events anymore. He stayed away from the crowded tavern and only ventured into town when he had to. He had everything he needed right here, the ranch, the land, and the quiet company of his own thoughts. But everything changed the day Annabelle Harper arrived. It was an ordinary Tuesday when the letter arrived in the mail. Ethan had been working outside, his hands covered in dirt as he tended to the horses, when he noticed the town's postman riding up on horseback. The letter was odd. The envelope was sealed with a wax stamp, something rare in these times, and the handwriting on the front was unfamiliar. Ethan wasn't one for gossip, but the letter's contents would stir up more than just the usual curiosity. It read, "Please accept this virgin bride. She is a gift." Ethan stared at the letter for a moment, unsure of what to make of it. He had heard of arranged marriages, especially in more traditional parts of the country, but the phrasing of this letter was unlike anything he had encountered. "A gift?" he muttered under his breath, confused. As he read the letter again, the only thing that stood out was the name mentioned at the bottom, Annabelle Harper. The letter gave no other explanation, only the promise that she would be arriving in town soon. With a sigh, Ethan shoved the letter into his coat pocket, not giving it another thought. It was just some sort of mistake, he figured. Perhaps someone was playing a prank, or maybe it was some odd tradition he wasn't aware of. Little did he know, the arrival of Annabelle Harper would change his life forever. A few days later, she appeared in the town square, a figure who seemed to arrive from nowhere. The townspeople had gathered, whispering excitedly, as the mysterious woman stepped off the carriage. She was beautiful, there was no denying that. Her long dark hair framed her face, and her green eyes glimmered with an odd kind of knowing. She wore a modest dress, simple yet elegant, and seemed out of place in the dusty, country town. Ethan had been in town for a few errands when he first saw her. He hadn't meant to look, but he couldn't help himself. There was something about her that drew him in. Something familiar, almost haunting. It wasn't just her beauty or the way she carried herself. It was the feeling that seemed to radiate from her. Something in the way she moved through the crowd, like she belonged. She didn't appear lost, nor did she seem to be searching for anything. Instead, she looked as though she knew exactly where she was going, even though no one else had any clue what she was about. As she walked past him, something happened that made Ethan's heart race in a way it hadn't in years. Without thinking, he reached out to steady her as she almost stumbled. Their hands brushed. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow down. The world around him vanished. It was just him and Annabelle, standing there in the square, with the sun casting a warm light over everything. He felt a strange, almost electric pull between them, a sensation he couldn't explain, and it made him freeze in his tracks. Annabelle's eyes met his, and for an instant, there was something in her gaze that shook him to the core. It was as if she already knew him, as if she had been waiting for him all along. "Are you all right?" he finally managed to ask, his voice sounding hoarse in his own ears. Annabelle smiled gently, the corners of her lips curving upward, as if she had been expecting this very moment. "I'm fine," she replied softly, her voice calm and steady. But her words didn't feel like a simple reassurance, they felt like a confirmation. as though she knew the moment was important, and that she had been waiting for this exact encounter. Ethan was left standing there, dumbfounded. There was something about Annabelle, something more than just her appearance, more than just the way she carried herself, that made his heart skip a beat. He hadn't felt this kind of flutter in years. Was it possible that someone could just walk into your life and leave you feeling like your world had shifted? As she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd, Ethan stood frozen, his hand still tingling from where it had touched hers. He could hardly believe what had just happened, but there was no denying it. The moment had felt too real to be a coincidence. In the days that followed, the mysterious woman known as Annabelle Harper became a topic of discussion in town. Some spoke of her with admiration, others with suspicion. But everyone agreed that there was something different about her. She wasn't like the other women in town. Ethan couldn't get her out of his mind. He didn't understand why he kept thinking about her, why his heart would race whenever he thought of their brief encounter. He told himself it was nothing, just an odd moment. Maybe it was the way she had looked at him, the way she had seemed so certain, as if she had known him from some forgotten past. But the more he tried to push the thoughts away, the more they came rushing back. One evening, as Ethan sat alone in the quiet of his ranch, he caught sight of her again, this time, walking toward the ranch gate, as if she had come to see him. His breath caught in his throat, and before he knew it, he found himself standing outside, facing her once more. "Annabelle," he called, his voice low but steady. She turned, a soft smile crossing her face. "Ethan," she said, as though she had known him her entire life. It was then that Ethan realized she wasn't just a stranger who had come to town. She wasn't just some mysterious woman with a strange past. There was something deeper at play here, something far beyond what either of them could have anticipated. And Ethan, despite all the caution he had built up around his heart, knew that his life would never be the same again. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Annabelle, the brief encounter they had shared in the town square, the way her touch had sent a shiver through him, and the strange sense of familiarity she had given him all lingered in his mind. It wasn't just that she was beautiful or graceful. There was something deeper, something that seemed beyond reason or explanation. She had looked at him in a way that made him feel as though she knew him, as if she had been waiting for this very moment to meet him again. But why? How? Ethan couldn't make sense of it. Over the next few days, the mystery of Annabelle seemed to grow with each passing moment. He saw her around town, always so poised and calm, moving through the crowd like she belonged there. Yet there was something in her eyes, a glimmer of knowing that suggested she wasn't quite as ordinary as she appeared. Ethan found himself drawn to her in ways he couldn't explain. It was as if fate itself was pulling him toward her, a force that neither of them could deny. He decided to take matters into his own hands. He couldn't ignore the questions swirling around in his mind. What had brought Annabelle to town? Why had she been sent here? And more importantly, why did he feel as if he had known her his entire life? It was a connection that went beyond simple curiosity. It was something deeper, something that seemed to stretch back in time. One evening, after a long day of working on the ranch, Ethan made up his mind. He would go to see Reverend Charles, an old family friend who had lived in the town for as long as Ethan could remember. The Reverend was a man of wisdom, someone who knew the stories and secrets of the town like no one else. If there was anyone who could shed light on the strange circumstances surrounding Annabelle, it would be him. Ethan arrived at the Reverend's small cottage just as the sun was beginning to set. The warm glow of the evening light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows on the ground. The Reverend greeted him with a kind smile, inviting him inside with the familiar warmth that Ethan had always appreciated. They sat by the fire, the crackling sound of the wood filling the quiet air between them. "Reverend," Ethan began, his voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency, "I need your help. There's something strange going on in this town. I met a woman, Annabelle Harper, and I can't shake the feeling that I've known her before. There's something about her that feels so familiar, as if she's been a part of my life for a long time." The Reverend looked at him carefully, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he had been expecting this conversation. "Ah, Annabelle Harper," he said, his voice soft but knowing. I had a feeling this day would come. You see, Ethan, there's more to this than you realize. Annabelle's arrival isn't a coincidence. It's part of something much older, something that stretches back through the generations. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? What do you know about her? The Reverend leaned forward, his voice lowering as though he were about to reveal a long-guarded secret. There's a history between your family and hers, Ethan. A bond that was made long before either of you were born. A promise was made between the Caldwell family and the Harper family. A promise that would one day bring you two together. But it wasn't just a promise of marriage or love. It was something much deeper, something that connected you both in ways that neither of you can fully understand. Ethan stared at the Reverend, his mind racing. A promise? What kind of promise? And why now? Why has she come to town now? The Reverend sighed, as though the weight of the story he was about to share had been pressing on him for many years. The promise was made by your ancestors, long ago, when both families were part of a larger, more powerful legacy. They knew that one day, a connection would be forged between the Caldwell and Harper families, a connection that would bring balance and fulfillment to both sides. But the details of the promise were lost in time. All that remained was the belief that when the time was right, the two families would come together. And now, Annabelle has arrived. She is the key to fulfilling that promise. Ethan was silent for a long moment, his thoughts a whirlwind. So, you're saying that Annabelle is somehow meant to be a part of my life? But I don't know why? Yes, the Reverend replied. That's exactly what I'm saying. There's a bond between you two that transcends this lifetime. It's a connection that stretches across generations, perhaps even centuries. But the truth is, you and Annabelle are both part of something much larger than yourselves. The forces that brought her to you are beyond your control. The room felt heavier as the Reverend's words settled in. Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing. A connection? A promise made by his ancestors? It all sounded like something out of a storybook. But as much as he wanted to dismiss it as nonsense, the feelings he had for Annabelle were too strong to ignore. They had been drawn to each other from the moment their hands had touched, and there was no denying that something deeper was at play. Does Annabelle know all of this? Ethan asked, his voice thick with confusion. The Reverend shook his head slowly. No. She doesn't know the full extent of it yet, but she has sensed the connection, just as you have. In time, she will come to understand. But for now, it's important that you don't push her too hard. Let her come to you when she's ready. Ethan stood up, his mind buzzing with questions. What should I do now? How do I even begin to understand this? What does it all mean for me, for Annabelle? The Reverend looked at him with a knowing gaze, his expression serious. You must follow your heart, Ethan. But remember, the road ahead will not be easy. There are forces at work here that neither of you fully understand, and there will be challenges, perhaps even dangers that lie ahead. But if you both embrace this connection, you may find that the love and destiny you share are more powerful than you ever imagined. Ethan left the Reverend's cottage that evening with more questions than answers. His head was spinning, and his heart was conflicted. How could he wrap his mind around this? How could he accept that his life, the life he had carefully built and kept separate from the rest of the world, was now entangled with a woman he had just met? A woman who seemed to hold the key to something ancient and mysterious? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he couldn't ignore the pull between them. There was something undeniable between him and Annabelle. He needed to see her again, to talk to her, to understand more of what this connection really meant. The next day, after much deliberation, Ethan set out to find Annabelle. He didn't know what to say or how to explain everything he had just learned, but one thing was certain. He had to find her, and he had to find the answers that had eluded him. The mystery of Annabelle Harper, and the bond that tied them together, was just beginning to unfold. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was happening between him and Annabelle. Every time he saw her, it was as if time itself slowed down. There was a magnetic pull between them, something that he couldn't explain but could never ignore. It was as though every glance, every small gesture, every shared moment, was a piece of a puzzle that he wasn't sure how to put together. Annabelle, too, seemed affected by the connection. At times, he caught her looking at him with an intensity that made his heart race. It was as though she was searching for something in him, something that neither of them fully understood. She would smile at him with a quiet kind of knowing, like she was holding a secret, but never shared it. Yet, her eyes, those green eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 emotions, revealed a depth he couldn't ignore. It had been a few days since Ethan had spoken with Reverend Charles, and still, he wasn't sure what to make of all the revelations. A promise between their families, a connection that spanned lifetimes. It sounded like something from an old legend, not a real-life story. But the more time he spent with Annabelle, the more he realized that there was something deeply true about it all. There was no denying the chemistry between them, no matter how impossible it seemed. Ethan knew that he needed to talk to Annabelle to understand what was happening between them. He had to know whether she felt the same pull, the same mysterious bond that seemed to draw them together. But whenever he tried to approach her, the words never seemed right. He felt like he was on the edge of understanding something important, yet it was always just out of reach. One evening, after a long day of work on the ranch, Ethan found himself walking toward Annabelle's small cottage. The sky was painted in soft hues of orange and pink, the sun dipping below the horizon as a gentle breeze rustled through the trees. It was one of those peaceful, quiet evenings that made everything feel right with the world. Yet Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of anticipation that hung in the air. He knocked on her door, and within moments, she answered. Her presence seemed to fill the doorway. And for a moment, Ethan could only stand there, speechless. There was something in the way she looked at him, something unspoken that passed between them. Her hair, loose and flowing, framed her face, and her soft smile made his heart beat a little faster. Ethan, Annabelle said softly, her voice like a melody that seemed to calm his racing thoughts. What brings you here tonight? He didn't know how to answer. How could he explain the whirlwind of emotions that had been consuming him? How could he explain that he felt like he had been waiting for this moment, for her, for so much longer than he could remember? I need to talk to you, Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. There's something I can't ignore, something between us. I don't understand it, Annabelle, but I can't stop thinking about it. Annabelle's expression softened. She stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. The cottage was cozy, filled with the faint smell of lavender and fresh wood. It was quiet inside, and for a moment, it felt like the outside world had disappeared. Ethan sat down by the fire, and Annabelle joined him, her presence calming the storm of thoughts in his mind. I feel it too, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This pull, it's like we've known each other for a lifetime, even though we've only just met. Sometimes, I feel like I've been waiting for you. I don't know how to explain it, but it's real. Ethan looked at her, his heart swelling with emotion. But why? Why is it so strong? Why do I feel like I'm meant to be with you? Annabelle took a deep breath, her fingers tracing the edge of her teacup nervously. I don't know the answers, Ethan. But I have a feeling that our meeting wasn't by chance. I think there's something we're meant to discover. Something that has been waiting for us. I've been having dreams, memories, things that don't make sense, things that I can't explain. It's as if my soul remembers something, but my mind doesn't. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Dreams? What kind of dreams? Annabelle hesitated for a moment, her gaze distant as if she were trying to recall something long forgotten. I dream of a life with you. Not in this time, but in another. We were together, Ethan. In another life, we were deeply in love. I can feel it, like an echo from the past. And when I look at you now, I see pieces of that life, fragments that feel so familiar. The air between them seemed to hum with the weight of her words. Ethan was stunned. He had always dismissed the idea of past lives as nothing more than fanciful thinking. But the way Annabelle spoke about it, the emotion in her voice, it made him wonder if there was some truth to it after all. Was it possible that their connection went beyond this lifetime? That it had roots in another time? I've felt something too, Ethan confessed. his voice quiet but certain. "Ever since I met you, I felt like there's something I'm supposed to remember. Something that connects us. But I don't know what it is." Annabelle reached out and gently took his hand in hers. The touch was electric, as though the contact was a key to unlocking something deeper. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Her touch was warm, comforting, yet it sent a shiver down his spine. It was as though she had always belonged there, as though this was how things were always meant to be. "I don't know what we're supposed to do with all of this," Annabelle said softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "But I know that I can't walk away from it. I can't walk away from you." Ethan felt the same. As much as he had tried to deny it, as much as he had tried to keep his heart guarded, he knew now that there was no turning back. The pull between them was undeniable, and whatever this connection was, it was too strong to ignore. They sat in silence for a while, their hands intertwined, the warmth of the fire flickering in the background. Neither of them had the answers, but they both knew one thing for sure. They couldn't deny the bond that had brought them together. Over the next few days, their connection grew stronger. Every moment they spent together felt more meaningful, more intense. It wasn't just the physical attraction between them, though that was undeniable. It was something deeper, something that resonated in their hearts and souls. But despite the growing closeness between them, they both knew that there were questions left unanswered. Why had this connection formed between them? What were they meant to do with it? And perhaps most pressing of all, who or what was behind this bond? As they spent more time together, they began to realize that the love they were building wasn't just about them. It was part of something much larger. Something that neither of them could fully understand. But whatever it was, they knew they had to face it together. And so, despite the uncertainty and the mysteries that lay ahead, Ethan and Annabelle chose to embrace the bond they shared. They didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long while, they felt truly alive, together, connected, and ready to face whatever challenges the future might hold. The days following their deep conversation were filled with a mix of wonder and uncertainty. Ethan and Annabelle spent more and more time together, each moment drawing them closer. But despite the tenderness between them, there was a heavy sense of foreboding that neither could shake. They knew that their bond wasn't just about love, it was part of something bigger, something that neither of them fully understood. Ethan had always been a man of action. He had spent his life working the land, caring for animals, and solving problems with his own hands. But when it came to Annabelle, he found himself unsure, even helpless. Every time he looked at her, his heart swelled with affection. But questions kept swirling in his mind. What did all of this mean for their future? Why had they been brought together? And, more importantly, how would they face the challenges that they could feel lurking on the horizon? One evening, after a long day working on the ranch, Ethan sat on the porch, staring out at the horizon. The sun was dipping below the mountains, casting a golden hue over the land. He was lost in thought when Annabelle joined him, sitting beside him in comfortable silence. The two of them often found solace in these quiet moments, when words weren't necessary, and everything felt right just by being together. "Ethan," Annabelle said softly, breaking the silence, "do you ever wonder what this all means? What we're supposed to do?" Ethan turned to her, his heart in his chest. "I do," he admitted. "I don't have the answers, Annabelle. I've never felt anything like this before. It's like something from a dream, something that I can't quite explain. But I feel like we're supposed to be together. I know that much." She nodded, her eyes gazing out at the vast land before them. "I feel the same way. But sometimes, it's like there's something trying to pull us apart. Something bigger than us." Ethan understood what she meant. There was an invisible weight that hung between them, a force neither of them could name. It wasn't just the uncertainty about their bond. It was the awareness that their connection wasn't simply a matter of fate, but of destiny. And destiny, it seemed, had a way of making things complicated. As they sat together, the evening air began to cool. The soft rustle of the trees and the distant calls of animals were the only sounds that filled the space around them. But within Ethan's heart, a storm was brewing. He could no longer ignore the unease that had been building inside him. What was it that he and Annabelle were meant to face? And more importantly, what would happen if they failed to do what they were destined for? That night, as Ethan lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about the Reverend's words. He had been warned that there were forces at work that neither he nor Annabelle fully understood. The promise between their families was more than just a tradition. It was something powerful, something that had been waiting for them to fulfill it. But what if they weren't ready? What if they couldn't live up to the expectations of their ancestors? What if the challenges ahead were too great? The next morning, as dawn broke over the ranch, Ethan woke up early, feeling a sense of urgency in his chest. He knew that he couldn't keep avoiding the truth any longer. He needed to talk to Annabelle again, to face the reality of their situation. When he found her, she was sitting near the barn, her hands gently stroking the mane of one of the horses. There was a peacefulness about her, a serenity that Ethan envied. He had always been someone who sought to control his world, to make sense of everything, but with Annabelle, he realized, there was no clear path. There was no easy answer. "Annabelle," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "We can't keep pretending that this is just a coincidence. There's something bigger at work here. Something we have to face together." She turned to him, her expression serious yet filled with understanding. "I know. I've been feeling it too. The weight of everything. It's like we're being drawn toward something we have to do. But I don't know what it is either." Ethan took her hands in his, feeling the warmth of her touch. "We don't have all the answers. But I believe in us, Annabelle. I believe in what we have. And whatever is coming, we'll face it together. We have Artito. We coming will beat it with summons as whirly as prosebest." Annabelle smiled softly, squeezing his hands. "Together," she repeated, as if those words were all they needed. But even as they stood there, holding each other, neither of them could shake the feeling that their love would soon be tested in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Later that day, as they were walking through the fields, they were approached by a group of townspeople. Ethan immediately recognized them, a few of the older, more influential families in town. People who had always seemed to keep a watchful eye on things. Their faces were serious, and their intentions were clear. Ethan Caldwell. Annabelle Harper. One of the men, a tall, stern figure named Thomas Barker, said as he approached. "We need to talk." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He could sense the tension in the air, a sudden shift that made everything feel heavier. He turned to Annabelle, who looked just as uncertain as he felt. "What is it?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but firm. "We know about the connection between you two," Thomas said, his voice low. "We know about the promise made long ago, and we believe it's time to end it." Annabelle's eyes widened, and Ethan's chest tightened. "What do you mean, end it?" "The promise your families made is dangerous," Thomas continued. "It was never meant to be fulfilled. We've kept it buried for generations. But now, it's become clear that you and Annabelle are being led toward something that could destroy everything. The bond between you two is unnatural, and we can't allow it to continue." Ethan felt a surge of anger rise in him, but he kept his composure. "This is our choice," he said firmly. "We are the ones who decide what happens next. Not you. We won't let you jeopardize everything we've worked for." Thomas shot back. "The bond between your families was a curse, not a blessing. And if you refuse to stop it, we'll have no choice but to intervene." As the group turned to leave, Ethan could feel the weight of their words hanging in the air. This was no longer just a matter of love. It was a battle for their future, for their right to be together. Later that night, Ethan and Annabelle sat in the quiet of the cottage, processing everything that had happened. The challenge they had faced was only the beginning. The forces that sought to keep them apart weren't just from the town. They were part of a much larger web of power and history that neither of them fully understood. "What do we do now?" Annabelle asked softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "We do what we've always done," Ethan said, his voice steady. "We stand together. We fight for what's ours." Annabelle nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Together, she repeated, her eyes shining with determination. And so, with the weight of their destiny ahead of them, Ethan and Annabelle made their decision. They would embrace the love they shared. No matter the challenges, they would stand strong against whatever forces tried to tear them apart. Together, they would face the future, a future that was uncertain but filled with the promise of love, courage, and the unbreakable bond they had formed. No matter what came next, they knew they would face it side by side.